So it's been a bit of a week. Um, gonna recap X-Aid kind of quickly because X-Aid True Ending kind of popped in the route I usually watch it in. No offense to anybody who liked Excite subs. I'm honestly indifferent to them. They've had some good moments. They had some poor moments. They're a newer group, so yeah, they subbed True Ending a couple weeks ago, I think, along with their Redux of Blade. And speaking of which, yeah, I'll try to use Blade through however far they're done when I'm around to editing it, because I've watched the TV Nihon side. There aren't as many mistakes in that version as people say there are, at least from what I saw. So, yeah, but yeah, X8 True Ending. Dumb movie. Very dumb. The main force of the plot is around this girl named Madoka who has a brain tumor, which is lethal, and has been in the hospital for some time, and has been refusing operations to get rid of it. Now, this is immediately dumb because, first of all, I have experience with people and having bad tumors in them. My dad and, come to think of it now that I remember it, my aunt also both had cancerous tumors that, because they caught them early, had them removed, and there has been no remission in all the time since that, and it has been years. So they're about in the clear area. But the thing about that is you need to get rid of them immediately, as then if they grow, they just makes them worse and gets more complications. But this girl is refusing her treatment because she says, "Oh, now I won't be able to compete in the sports festival." There's this annual sports festival that occurs in late September, early October, depending on when they schedule it for a relevant school year. In fact, some of them take place in the spring, depending on where and what seasonal conditions fall in Japan. But the thing is, though, is that that's late September, early October. This movie takes place at late July, beginning August. So, 2 months of recovery time? That should be more than enough to do it. Thus, it's stupid for her to be refusing entirely. The second major thrust of the film is her father, Kamen Rider Fuma, who uses the Hurricane Ninja Ga shot. And he is also not someone that inspires empathy from me, because he abandoned his family when Madoka was born. Madoka has never met her father. In fact, from all evidence, he gave up all parental rights. Thus, it does not make sense from a character perspective for someone with that backstory to suddenly go all, "I need to save my daughter is in trouble, I need to do this thing for her to give her a better life and sap her into virtual space." No, none of that makes sense, because you abandoned her. You have been completely out of her life on purpose. You willfully made the decision to not be there for her. Thus, you can't have the character motivation where I'm making up all this lost time with my daughter when you had the option from the beginning to be with her and you blew it. It makes no sense to, these tumors are treatable. Just minor, okay, it's brain surgery, and brain surgery should never be considered minor, but it's a routine procedure to go in for that kind of thing. It is in no regards easy. I'm not trying to play it off, or there aren't threats or complications, but if it's treatable, if someone can go into surgery for it and they do it, why are you delaying? You literally have no conflict in this movie, because the conflict is the girl having a brain tumor and wanting to go to the sports festival but can't because of the brain tumor. Remove the brain tumor! So yeah, most of the related Kamen Rider Fuma plots in that movie is stupid because of that to me. And, well, because what Fuma wants is to sap everyone into a virtual simulation VR world with his daughter as the protagonist, so he can give her this sports festival day before she dies. Except she doesn't die in the movie, because, again, brain tumors are treatable! No, he is being manipulated by I should actually... The Presidents of Machina Vision, which we saw at the ending of the series in a few of the episode tie-ins where he tried to get, Gundam Corp's technology for his own uses in his virtual, whatchamacallit? Yeah, guy's name is Johnny Maxima. And basically, he wanted it for his own gaming technology and take Kamen Rider Chronicle and whatnot international. But when they defeated Kronos, because as was revealed late after the series ended, because they didn't want to spoil the movie, which is set a full year after the series ended, Johnny Maxima stole Gundam Corp technology, basically a prototype gamer driver and the Hurricane Ninja Gashot for his own uses, and to develop this VR system. When they eventually defeat Fuma and Emu releases everyone trapped by using the Mighty Creator VRX Gashot, which has all of 5 minutes of relevancy in the story, which means it was freaking pointless. I mean, Drive Super Dead Heat in Drive's movie had more relevance, and Drive's movie had Kamen Rider Next, Kamen Rider Drive type special with the special debut, a whole long gambit with the Paradox Droid mood, and of course the Show Dead Heat Drive form for that. Yet all of that new stuff didn't seem crowded, whereas the only thing in here that's new is the Mighty Creator VRX and the Hurricane Ninja Kamen Rider Fuma stuff and the Fuma minions, because, well, past that, Johnny Maxima ends up taking on the form of Game Deus Machina, which is just another Game Deus, and I don't even think it's visually different. Actually, cross-referencing that, the only difference is a color palette swap of the standard Game Deus, which I am not adverse to. Like, I got what they were going for it. They were doing it's even in the name. It's the true ending for the series, meaning that you have this extra boss fight. In certain video games, instead of just building an entirely new final end boss after you complete any additional extra stuff or additional after the ending side story, instead of a new monster you fight, you just go beat up a souped up version of the original final boss, so Game Deus Machina being a red, more graphite color schemed final boss, yeah, that doesn't really bug me as much as it is others, because there's a few signs that they're actually, through Kuroto and Paradox's actions, they were able to suppress this variant of the Game Deus virus that Johnny Maxima surged into, so it didn't have the all-consuming power that it should have had through Maxima's machinations, because how he planned to pretty much rule the world was use what's the guy's name? Player Nico Kamarafuno. Kagenari is Fuma's name. He used Kagenari's advancement of his VR technology to pretty much trick into the system, pretty much the Game Deus system, not the Game Deus system, trick the programming of it with the completion flags for the VR game he had his daughter in to shortcut his own Bugster evolution to a new version of Game Deus, which is, of course, the Game Deus Maxima, and giving him unlimited power. But thing is, though, you can kind of see the flaw in this plan in that you needed Modoka still hooked into this whole thing for it to run at full power. And by the end of the movie, through some pretty bad dialogue, they just shortcut Kagenari into the realization that he should be there for his daughter as she is recovering, because they get her through the surgery and she's fine, aside from a lack of will to live, which is just freaking stupid. Because, yeah, we do the cliche of the second he's there, she usually open her eyes, and yeah, it's pretty freaking terrible with that whole plot. I really do think that the whole Redux the Game Deus part of it is the best part of it, but only because of that new Final Boss Plus aspect to it. Yeah. At least we have the another ending movies coming for it, because this is kind of a terrible way to end X8, and I'm hoping the 3V cinemas that are coming, I think the first one's already out, the second one's coming later this... No, the second one's coming in April, the first one should be out later this month. Regardless, I hope those give a better conclusion to things than this did, because, yeah, pretty much an idiot plot. Lupinranger versus Patranger. You're still failing the proper focus on the Patranger, because now you've correctly shifted the paradigm to a balance between the two teams and the feuding plot points, but again, your problem is you have failed to set up the Patranger correctly. You just focused on the episode you should have given to them, and gave it to more Lupinranger stuff. Thus, you're still failing the setup that you need to justify the rest of the plot. How hard is this? Now, despite that, this isn't exactly a bad episode, but more continues the setup of the status quo between them, with, See, now I need to pull up the Lupinranger page. Just because I don't want to be screwing up on names. Okay, Tuma, Lupin Blue, comes to the realization as the Patranger come in for lunch, leading off from last time, that they're going to eventually need to steal the Lupin collection pieces that are in the police's hands to complete the collection to get the wish to revive their friends. As was set up in the last two episodes. But, Kairi is being cautious, because pretty much you only got one shot at doing this correctly, otherwise you'll completely screw it up, and the worst possible way to do it is to give away your identities as these, cafe runner, these people running this cafe. So it's best to lay low, take our time, and make sure you get all the other pieces out of the gangler's hands, because they're the more immediate threat with how they're abusing them, and if they fail and screw up and one of the pieces is destroyed, they'll never get their wish anyways. And that's a concern, because the Patranger are kind of reckless idiots, and yeah, I was hoping they weren't going to do that, but they don't do it, like, the full way you'd expect it. But going back to this, the episode is pretty much resolving, like, Tuma's impulse to just eliminate the Patranger, and the way Kairi goes about explaining it is... The way I keep describing Super Sentai's Idiot Reds is they are glorified and made right, completely in contradiction to reality and the situation they're specifically in. The show bends itself backwards to justify the Red Rangers always being in the right, and with ones that are actually wrong, it is self-destructive to them. This is why I count the bad ones being Toku, of the last several, being Tokuger, Nindinger, and Q-Ranger, because they all did that. Kyoryuger, which many accuse of it, did not actually do so. Zyuohger did not do so. They actually bent it the other way. They made the characters conform to the plot, even though it was in contradiction to what the show had presented about them. So it had kind of had the opposite problem at the end of the day, and that's kind of why it's more mediocre, because you can see some of where they were going with that, but you didn't justify the rest of it, and thus the character went in a different direction than was eventually intended, which is a big emphasis on why I think Zyuohger's final arc is so frankly terrible. They didn't do this with Go Busters because that would require Go Busters to have definite character. But you're getting my point. Kyrie here is right in that if they screw up for a short-term goal, all of their long-term goals are like wasted. If Tuma gets himself outed and arrested, then Kyrie and Umika are banned down, and it becomes more difficult for all of them, and Tuma potentially loses the chance at the wish he wanted. And like awareness of that is showing that while Kyrie can act kind of goofy and happy-go-lucky, he's not an idiot. He's much more clever than he lets on, and half of his jokey attitude is a facade disguising a pretty intelligent guy. This is actually how you do that kind of thing. The attitude isn't a excuse for how they act, it's a way to make them seem, what's the phrase? It disguises how they act, disguises how intelligent they are, instead of, being an idiot being the key to victory, which again is how it is with the bad Red Rangers. Most of the episode's focus, however, is on Tuma and Patron Nigo Sakia Hikawa, and which was a good thing. The Red Ranger is helping the Red Rangers of each team are helping a secondary member through a lesson that is more personally driven. Sakia, in his side of the plot, is overenthusiastic, is, I think, the best way to describe how he is. He is more of a rookie cop than either Keiichiro or Tsukasa, ergo explaining why he would think in one of the earlier episodes that maybe the Lupinranger aren't so bad. But his inexperience means that his eccentricity to show that he can do a good job is sabotaging him because he doesn't have the experience to back up the action, so he's going to screw up. This is what's happening with him, or at least happened with him in this episode, is essentially what happened with Fuka in Ninja, except in Ninja, they use that inexperience and disinterest in the ninja thing to constantly belittle and insult the character. Here, it's just showing Sakia as needing more assistance and not at as capable a level as his companions. Like Ubika with the Lupinranger, he is the Patranger's weak link. And with Keiichiro Asaka's Zenigata from Lupin III inspired eccentricities and forcefulness and dogged pursuit of the law at all costs, it kind of shows that Tsukasa, who I keep saying has no character, more defines her as the mama bear, as, well, she's got nothing else to do but rein the other two in, which actually begins to show how she should have character. And hopefully from the trailers for episode 4, Tsukasa is going to get a bit more expansion next time. So it's actually in hindsight, or not so much in hindsight, but with the continuing clashing of the characters, you're kind of seeing the rivalrous parallels. Kyrie's how should I describe this? Clever guy who hides his intelligence behind a smile. Tuma's the serious, driven guy whose opposite is... Sorry, rephrase. Tuma and Sakia are both driven individuals, but one has more control than the other, and then Umika versus Tsukasa is the inexperienced whiner versus, pretty much what I described before, the responsible mama bear. So it's a bit more of a contrast. I think that's the best way to describe it. Contrast in personalities that complement and help build the rivalrous dynamic that's going to probably be the driving force of the show. Well, I shouldn't say probably, has to be the driving force of the show, as I keep saying, you can't emphasize one as You can't emphasize one as automatically better than the other and then allow the show to keep working on the storytelling engine it's supposed to. Other things. Good Striker, the combiner mech, pretty much does not have a good showing this time when it forms the Patranger mech, because it pretty much just gets browbeaten into it this first time, like practically enslaved into doing it. Oh, speaking of which, when the Lupinranger used the Good Striker with their guns, instead of fusing them like they did Patra and Yugo, it just clones the opposite, the member that's using it, which I find amusing because it's pretty much the opposite of what happened, and pretty much the sequence of them, you thinking what's going to happen, and it's a complete subversion. That was pretty good. But there's not a defined way of explaining why the Lupinrangers clone themselves, aside from, doppelgangers to elude pursuit, while the Patranger are thematically a united force of justice. But I think it's more because when it's in its dial fighter mode, you can input commands into the dial that the Patranger can't do. So maybe the Lupinranger, since they have more knowledge of how the Lupin collection works, will be able to do more varied things with it. I don't know at this point. But yeah, the up to 5-member finisher was good. But the Pato-Kaiser combination, not so much. See, the last episode, I emphasized that how they have the Lupin Kaiser fight invokes a lot of collateral damage. But here, well, Pato-Kaiser is more constrained. Not constrained. Restrained and direct. Not direct. Again, how do I describe this? It's not invoking as much collateral damage. There is collateral damage from how they're evading attacks from the monster, but it's not like, they're not like adding to it, which was more the Lupinrangers thing with them firing wildly, which honestly, it's a weird contrast in that the Lupinranger are usually very acute in how they're striking precisely. Yeah, that's a better way to describe it. They're very precise in their movements and actions on the ground, while the Patranger are more reckless and wild despite being police officers. And yet, that completely swaps out when they switch to the Megazord brawls, which is just strange to me. But yeah, reason Good Striker's going rogue now against both sides instead of the Lupinranger having a monopoly on him is, well, the Lupinranger are allied with Kogure, who holds on to the entire Lupin collection, and yeah, he's pretty much terrified of the guy, so instead of staying with the Lupinranger, he just pretty much went free agent and will help whichever side he happens to run into. Granted, I don't like the relationship of how they treat him with the Patranger, again, because, well, if you're forcing someone into battle like that against their will, and it's a sentient mech, yeah, all kinds of bad things can happen down the line. Granted, the monster of the episode was kind of weak, but my roommate Matt pointed out something as we were watching. See, the monster Rup Room. No, that's next week's. Namuro Bacho is a art thief and recreationist. Essentially, he creates forgeries, and his big plan was turning a bunch of objects into statues of Dogranio Yaboon. And at that I'm thinking, how is this going to help you take over the world? Your goal is to take over the world to actually get your way up to being the leader. And what was pretty much pointed out is he's not actually taking over the world, he's taking over some aspect of the world, like cornering all crime on art forgeries or something like that. And I'm thinking, okay, that's a way to go about it. I don't think it's very effective. And then in the episode, Dogranio Yabun says, it doesn't matter the way they conquer the world as long as they conquer it. And it's like, okay. Plus, what my roommate also pointed out was, it's not going to really matter who does these interim plots. They're clearly going to be running through the petty, less competent, and short-term thinking members first, and then they'll then start encountering all the more complex, long-term thinking minions as the show goes on, and as they've had more time to set up their plots to do things. And I really, really hope he's right, and that's how we end up seeing things go about, but this is Toei. We're pretty sure they're not. It's because, like, they rarely so ever think that far ahead. Like, I can name on my hand the number of writers Toei uses for Super Sentai that have that kind of long-term thinking, or at least have that kind of long-term thinking without eventually screwing it up with their own diversions and intermediary problems with the characters. So yeah, that just leaves Build. Crocodile Crack is it's a freaking good suit, and that doesn't change the more I see of it, as well, it's just good design work, and the backstory behind why Gentoku went that way is just, they're clearly setting up small tells as it's going to be more expanded on in the Kamen Rider Rogue miniseries that's coming with the Blu-rays. Yeah, they should really stop doing that, because the last several of them they've tried that with have not gone over very well. It's like, you more have to conform them to a clip show than a lot more details that could be granted, because Taigo's was in 4 parts, and like only 2 were really that relevant to anything, and kind of immaterial due to the other details given about them in the show. So, if they're going to give the full torture porn exploits of Gentoku and what he experienced to need to get up to the level to use the Crocodile Crack full bottle over the course of the week, we only have 2-3 weeks of time span before, they don't have any more time. So that, like, it feels like too short a period since Gentoku's disappearance to really allow them. Okay, yeah, maybe it was 2 weeks between Sento's first use of the Hazard Trigger and then the final fight before Sato took over. So 2 weeks still does not feel like enough time. I don't know, maybe I'm getting the timeline a bit wrong, and it could be a bit longer than that, but it doesn't feel like it should be. But yeah, he's pretty much given up everything in the name of his ideal of how to restore the unison of the country, and he definitely doesn't see it as happening through camaraderie of any form, but conquest. And you pretty much know they're playing into the Three Kingdoms story that a lot of series kind of pull this from, in at least Japanese lore, where they do the 3 separate kingdoms and the conquest between characters. Not conquest between characters, but almost mythical warriors that make up the forces that fight over them to become the true champion of all 3 of them. We get some other good stuff that results from it, though, such as Sawatari coming to the cafe and pretty much moving in with his insistence on now they'll be fighting together to stop Sato and Rogue, because, yeah, he is still so much more ridiculously powerful than either of them. And we have some scenes of Bloodstock, Soichiro, trying to insist on Sento continuing to use the hazard trigger to increase his hazard level because he needs Sento to have a specific hazard level for his own schemes. And then we have the beginnings of Misora and the Bangal plot kind of coming to a fruition with what's going on with her, in that whatever is part of her now is starting to awaken. And it's like, I gotta admit, abused at this part at what kind of starts tipping it off, because what Sento and Misora were talking about at the time was like wanting to see Sento go back to being his happier self, like he was at the earlier start of the series, where he was happy helping people, even though he was a bit arrogant about it, as he was fighting for love and peace. For those who haven't seen, that is a reference to Trigun, mid-90s Western science fiction series. Not like Firefly and Serenity, more like you're on another world that's dusty and barren like the Wild West was, and you're following around a gunslinger that believes in love and peace above all else. And speaking of, the character was voiced by Johnny Yong Bosch in English, so yeah, you got the 6 degrees of Toei coming into that. But basically why I keep doing the pose is because they do the direct call-out reference to it in this episode, with Misora doing that when they were discussing this before she falls, like, asleep all of a sudden without any seeming cause, until the end of the episode, where everyone is absolutely getting crushed by Rogue and the Gear Brothers, and it's like, the fighting stops the second she shows up, and her eyes glow green, and it's like, oh crap, we just hit the next milestone for the story progression, that they're explaining what's, Soichiro and that Bangal has actually done to Misora, and everything that might be tied to that concerning Pandora's box, and whether she's potentially being possessed by the original Pandora, because, like, there's a reason behind that name scheme. I mean, yeah, it's just obviously a special classification they gave it because, you know, after they found it, it became a Pandora's box of chaos, destruction, and suffering. So it is obviously not the real Pandora, but if it's Pandora's box, then where is its owner? Where is the owning Pandora? So could she potentially be possessed by whatever would relatedly be the Pandora in this situation, or related to this artifact? I'm thinking that's how they're going with it, but we'll probably start to see development of that in the next episode, as we're probably only 2-3 episodes out before the debut of Rabbit Rabbit Tank Tank. I doubt they're going to do it next time because they didn't show it in the previews for the next episode, but I'm betting 26-27 is when it's going to start showing up, which, all things considered, is kind of late, considering Kamen Rider final forms are usually the early 30s, not the late 30s, so if they're pushing back Genius's debut to episode 36, it'll probably give enough time for a decent showing of those forms, but with how the show has been running through forms like candy, it's like, are they even going to bother with giving it the time to actually be shown off? I kind of skipped around the build plot a bit because, honestly, most of this one was dedicated to jokes where the characters play off of each other, like Kazumi Sawatari and Ryuga Banjo not getting along at all, which, big surprise, and yet it always seems like it's on the same thing that I keep having to critique with this show. It's more interested in using Ryuga as the consistent butt monkey within the framework of the story, versus actually having him have a purpose, or for him to permit progression of the story with his involvement in the plot. He still seems pretty much ancillary and unneeded in everything. And it's kind of frustrating as you feel like the guy should have something, and yet he really doesn't at the end of the day. Um, Speaking of which, yes, I also watched the Televikun Hyper Battle video for Build, and what's there to say? Kazumi Sawatari has another subordinate who is responsible for giving his team members the dog tags, and okay, it just seemed like kind of a waste of a plot, because honestly, it's just more goofball antics without any real point behind them, which, hey, is what the Hyper Battle videos usually do, but honestly, there didn't seem to be anything worth, like, the attention given to it this time with them. So it's like, they're usually kind of worthless with respect to this ongoing story, but they at least have something entertaining, and I didn't really get that from this one. Okay, but yeah, that's pretty much it for this week. Actually kept it pretty concise this time. Hopefully we will, have some pretty big, revelations next time with the main two I discuss in here, but yeah, hopefully I can get these shorter again. So, I'll see you all later.